Hello and welcome to this video guide from the School of Business and Creative Industries Ethics Committee. This video guide is a supervisor's guide to reviewing students' applications in the ERM system. And what this video is all about is to really help you to help your student get the best possible outcome from their ethical application. So, when you sign an application as a supervisor, when a student asks for your signature, you're telling the committee that you approve the application. And so what that means is that as a committee, as a reviewer, when we look at this, we are assuming that the supervisor who signed the project has read the application and has said they approve of this and that they've been through the project with the student. But that is, as I'm sure you're aware, not always the case. Quite often students will submit to the ethics committee without much input from their supervisor. And that tends to be what causes the application getting sent back for amendment. So I suppose what this guide is all about is really helping you as a supervisor to ensure that you're on the same page as the reviewer, so that we can make sure that there's a better chance of your application going through on the first attempt, or if it needs any modifications, that they're pretty minor. So the following slides detail what the SEC is looking for in order to appraise an application. So it's the same information that the reviewers would be looking for when they're looking at an application, so that you can be aware of this when you're helping your student go through the process of making an application to the ethics committee. But in short, what we're looking for in an ethics application is a clear and concise discussion of the project with a focus on why participants' personal data or risk to the researcher are necessary for the study. We're not looking for big, long methodological discussions. We're not looking for big, long philosophical debates into the nature of epistemology or ontology. We're looking for short, clear, concise discussions of what the project is, why it needs to have participants' personal data risk to the researcher, and how you're going to mitigate for any risk. So this guide hopefully will help you help your student get into a good place to make a submission that gets approved as quickly as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to now go through the ERM questions, or the questions the student will be asked, and explain very quickly what it is that we're looking for. So they'll be asked to give a title of their study, and we do look at that. We're looking at, is the title of the study appropriate? Is the wording appropriate? Is any of the wording problematic? And again, we're always aiming to try and say yes, to these applications. We're always aiming to try and approve. So any guidance we would give here is clearly just guidance. And very rarely there's any issue with the title of the study, but it is something we do look at. And so please do look at that yourself. Is the title of the study appropriate, especially if there's personal data or participants involved in the study? The next thing we'll look at is the primary purpose of the study. And as a supervisor, it will be research, I would imagine, for the most part, that your student will be involved in. That's a straightforward question. Where will the proposed research take place is another important one, however, that we're going to look at. As an ethics reviewer, then we're looking to see, is the space safe? Is the space appropriate? Has there been a risk analysis done if it's out with the university? So is the student standing at a roadside counting cars? Or the colour of cars? If so, there needs to be a risk analysis in place. How do we protect that student? How do we protect others? Same if they're doing interviews or focus groups in a room. Is there adequate ventilation? Is there social distancing just now during COVID? So we are looking for where the research is going to take place, and also how any risk that comes from that place is mitigated. And that's most commonly seen through the student and or the supervisor conducting a risk analysis or having a risk analysis in place. How will the cost of the study be met? For the majority of students, it will be they'll meet the costs themselves, but some may be funded. If they're funded, they should tell us for the reasons of transparency. Has the proposed study been considered by any other committee? For student applications, it's very rare that will be the case. However, if it has, you should provide those details in your application so that our committee can look at the considerations of the other committee. Now, we're not bound by the other committee, but it is good for us to try and work in combination with them where possible. Then we move on to the next question, which is really the biggest section of the application. It's the one that takes up the most space on the page, and it's got a 1,000-word limit. And that's where we're looking for the summary, purpose, justification, design, and methodology of the planned study. Now, there's a temptation here, and we see this again and again, to just really lift like a methodology chapter or a section of a methodology chapter and plonk it in. What we don't want to see in this section is an explanation of what qualitative research is, what quantitative research is, or any kind of textbooky stuff about the nature of research methodologies. What we're looking for here is a clear and concise discussion of what the project is, why you have to have, or why participants, personal data, or risk research is necessary for this project to work, and what is the methodology you're going to use in clear and simple terms. That's what we're looking for, not any big, deep methodological discussion. What's the nature of your study? Why do you need participants? And what's the methodology that you're going to use? Clear, simple, short terms. So I think the 1,000 word limit is quite misleading because it almost invites a longer discussion, but that's not what we need. That's not what we need here. We just need to know why the participants, why the risk to personal researcher, why personal data is required in the study, and what methodology you're going to use to gather that data. Below that is a question that's a wee bit problematic for us in the school. How is the scientific quality of the proposed research being assessed? Well, of course, not everything's going to be scientific. We often work in the interpretivist tradition here, so therefore you can just treat that as how has the quality of the proposed research project been assessed, and that's your job as the supervisor for the most part. So it should be it's a drop-down menu or a list of options the student can tick, and they should tick to say that you, as the supervisor, has assessed the quality of the project. Because it's obviously not the ethic committee's province to make any decisions about the methodology from a subject perspective. It's more we're making decisions about methodology from is it fair, open, honest, and ethical. So you should also be ticking to say that you have, the student should be ticking to say that you have looked through their project and that you are satisfied with the project. The student will then be asked to explain their sample size, and often we just see like a number thrown in. There's 6 participants, there's 22, there's 400. But what I actually want to see is an explanation of why you have the amount you have. So if it's a small sample, why is that relevant? If it's a large sample, why is that relevant? And what we're looking for is that your sample size is appropriate and in keeping with the nature of the project that the student is proposing. We're also looking then for an explanation of how you analyse, present, or disseminate the data, and that mainly comes down to the thesis or the dissertation. So what we're looking for there is an explanation of how you're going to present that. How is it going to be shared with the world? Is it going to be shared in a thesis that's publicly available? Is the thesis going to not be publicly available? Is there going to be anonymisation in there? We're just interested in how you're going to demonstrate care for your participants or yourself or personal data when you get to the point of sharing this information, your analysis with others. Below that is a question about, does the research involve individual group interviews? And so for the majority of ethical applications it will do, whether it's a focus group, an interview, a survey, whatever the case may be. If so, then the applicant should upload their interview guide and or questions, and we will look at those. And again, we're not looking at those and trying to assess them in relation to, is that going to get the best data? Is that the best well-designed? No, we're looking at it to say, is it fair? Is it open? Is it honest? Is the language non-problematic? So if they're asking about gender, race, ethnicity, for example, are they treating those subjects with care? Do they really need to ask about those subjects? That's the reason we're looking for. Those are the things we're looking for when we're looking at the interview guides, and questions. The next question below that follows on. So it's related to the discussing of sensitive, embarrassing, or upsetting topics, or the potential for disclosure of criminal or other problematic disclosures during the study. Now, we don't actually preclude that. We wouldn't preclude it. So if you wanted to talk about distressing, sensitive, or embarrassing topics, then that's not precluded. But what we're looking for is for your student to explain how that will be mitigated for. How are you going to provide a caring environment for your participants if you are talking about any of these topics? Now, sensitive is very vague, and I'm sure you're aware of this. So just asking about gender is a sensitive topic. So the majority of students will have to answer yes if they are going to collect data on gender, race, or ethnicity, and then explain why it's important and how they're going to mitigate for any distress that may come about in relation to that. So it seems a small question, but it actually is quite important. You do go through this in depth with the student. We also want to know how the student's going to recruit their participants. And we don't want just to say, we're going to put a call out via Facebook or this, that, the next thing. We want to see specifically how you're going to contact your participants, why you're contacting them that way, and how that mode of contact is safe, fair, and transparent for your participants. So quite an important question there. We are looking for a fairly well detailed explanation of how you're going to get the participants to come into the study. Also, we are then looking to see if there are any vulnerable participants in the study. So there's a list that the students will be given for them to check to see if any of their participants are vulnerable. If there are vulnerable participants in the study, it immediately amplifies the risk of the project and will probably lead to a wee bit further scrutiny. So, for instance, if there are children in the study or there are adults who are unable to consent for themselves, then that adds a complexity to the study because we do want to have informed consent from the participants in the study. So you would have to explain how you're then going to gain informed consent, why it's important to have this type of participant in the study. And again, we're not precluding any research in that area whatsoever. We just want to make sure that there is a well thought through process about involving such participants in the study. The next question is one that quite often gets overlooked, and it's about special pressures related to making it difficult for participants to take part in the study. So, for instance, commonly students will go to other students to collect their data. That's a special pressure because it's their friends, their peers, and so they might feel obliged to be involved in the study because they're doing a study of their own and know how important it is. Yes, we know this is probably where students are going to go. Now, that's fine. Students can absolutely do that, but they have to provide some form of mitigation. They have to provide some way that they can demonstrate how they won't pressure their colleagues and they'll make sure that they shouldn't feel pressured into conducting the study. Another way we see it is often via colleagues. So they go to their workplace and they ask colleagues to be involved in the research. Again, that's a special pressure. They can do so, but they do have to demonstrate how they are going to mitigate that. Same with family members, exact same process again. Will the participant be paid to take part? We just really need to know if there is money changing hands, because of course that's very important in relation to the ethics and the nature of the questions being asked and the amount of time the participant is involved in the study. For the vast majority of us, that will be no. Very, very rarely will that be anything other than no. What is the expected duration of participation in the study for each participant? Why we want to know that is because we want to see that the duration of participation is in keeping with the aims of the study and the methodology. So you're not bringing people in for like a very, very, very short interview over a very, very complex topic. Yeah, because then what is a participant going to gain from that? What's the facility to the participant in that duration of participation? As well, you're going to bring people in for an enormously long time and then only ask them very limited questions. Again, where's the facility? Are you wasting their time? That's what we're looking for there. We're looking to see that the duration of participation is in keeping with the nature of the study. So longitudinal studies with long involvement are absolutely acceptable, but they have to be in keeping with the nature of the application. Will informed consent be obtained from the study participants? We're looking for that to be always yes. Always yes. So if there are participants in the study, then we want to see informed consent gathered. And we want to see that through a participant information sheet and a consent form. And in both of the PIS and the consent forms, we want to see the supervisor, your details on that form so that a participant knows who to go to. We also would like to see the ethics committee's details on there as well, so that that's available. But primarily, it should be the supervisor there so that there is a contact that's beyond the student. We also really want to make sure that the PIS and the consent forms mention the right to withdraw. That's made clear that there's a right to withdraw for the participants. So both of those should be in place for every study. It's very unlikely we would ever authorise a study that doesn't involve the gathering of informed consent. But I mean, there may be cases where we do, but for the most part, we're looking for informed consent. The next one is about, is the study likely to cause discomfort, distress, either physical or psychological? And that can be seen as it's very similar to some of the early questions. But why this is a separate question is because it goes beyond thinking about interview questions. It actually goes to thinking about the whole process of the study in a wider context. So the place that the study is going to take place in, the nature of the questions, the duration, all these things in the broader sense are what we're looking at here. So could it be discomforting for a participant to have to be involved, be in a cramped space for a long period of time in order to be involved in a focus group? So that could be a discomfort or distress. That's the kind of information we're looking for to see here. And we're looking to see how that would be mitigated where possible. Does the proposed research involve any physical invasive procedures? For the vast majority of applications, it will be no. But there are some that it would be. So are you going to get them to try on some new technology, wearable technology? That could be invasive. Are you going to get them to try and use new stage prosthesis or film prosthesis? Again, these can be invasive procedures and they would have to be accounted for and mitigated. Does the proposed research involve deception regarding aims, objectives, or identity of the investigator? We're really looking for that to be no for the most part. We're not really interested in doing any covert studies here. That's not to say that you can't propose a covert study and we could consider it, but for the most part, covert studies are not what we're looking for. We're looking for that to be open, honest, and transparent. And so hopefully that'll be a straightforward question to answer. Will participants be debriefed after participation? That's really up to the researcher. Good practice, of course, is to debrief. But if you've got an enormous sample, then perhaps it's not effective and you can't debrief. You just tell us whether you will do so or not. And if you are going to do so, tell us how you will do so. Are there any other considerations you wish to bring to the attention of the committee? As an open option for the applicant to tell us anything they want that they think is relevant. It could be something that's in support of their application, something that helps mitigate risk in the application, or indeed it could be something that they've got in their mind that's not brought up by any of the questions we've asked, and it gives them a space to mention that or bring that to our attention. Very rarely that box is used, but occasionally it is, and it is good when it is because it can help the reviewer make the right decision. What measures will you put in place? So the next two questions address data, and they're two similar questions but different, and I'll hopefully explain why. It says want, there's a typo. What measures will you put in place to ensure the confidentiality of personal data gathered during your study? That refers to personal data as opposed to all the data. So gender, race, ethnicity, address, phone number, all this kind of stuff, personal data. Okay. How will that be kept confidential? That's what the first question refers to. And who will have access to data collected during the study and how will you keep it confidential? The second question refers to all of the data for the whole of the study, not just the personal data. So for both of these questions, we'd be looking for the student to keep their data on their UWS OneDrive account. That then brings it under our control. That gives us two-factor authentication for the data. That allows us to control the data if a device is lost or stolen. So really do push use of UWS OneDrive for the storage of data for both those questions. It also allows confidentiality because it's very difficult for others to get access to that information. Who will have access? Normally it will be the researcher, yourself as the supervisor, but it may be some others as well. So you should make clear everybody who's access to the data so that the participant would know that as they get into the study. And that is it. A very quick blast through. But I suppose the main thing I really want to say to you here is this: is that the applications that come through where the supervisor is involved in the drafting of the application tend to go through much faster than the applications where the student just submits on their own. Now I know that can be difficult to control because the student can just go ahead and do so without involving you. But I would really, as a supervisor, make sure that you're heavily involved in this process because it will absolutely speed up the getting the application approved. Okay, thanks so much for listening. Cheers.